Welcome to New Breakpoint, Microsoft's digital event series designed for developers by developers. I'm your host, Michelle Sandford, the Developer Engagement Lead for Australia, New Zealand and Asia. We broadcast on the second Thursday of every month, and if you join us on the day, my guest and I will answer your questions live in chat. As you might know, New Breakpoint has expanded to encompass all of Asia Pacific, meaning we now bring interviews with developer experts from all over Asia. Today, we are welcoming Microsoft MVP Haimantika Mitra, joining us from Bengaluru, India. Haimantika is an MVP in developer technologies and is the developer advocate program manager with DigitalOcean. Hi, Haimantika. Thanks for joining us. You've had an amazing journey from student advocate to Microsoft MVP and including a stint working at Microsoft. Can you tell us about your career path?
Absolutely. Firstly, thank you so much, Michelle, for inviting me to this series. I am looking forward to our conversation for the next 30 minutes to 1 hour and about my journey. It dates back to around 2019 while I was almost graduating from college and I was stuck and I didn't know that where do I see myself in the next 5 years or 10 years from now? What should I do? Which tech career should I choose? Because there were multiple options, and also I was not very technically skilled back then. And that is when I got to know about Microsoft Learn Student Ambassador program. Back in the days it was called Microsoft Student Partner. So I just applied for it and I got selected. And since that point is where my technical skills as well as people skills and all in all, all the skills, soft skills and everything, it started improving. And now almost 5 to 6 years later, this is where I am. But I joined the program and that is where I got to learn Azure. I got to build a lot with Power Platform. And since I was building, I was writing tutorials. Back then, I did not know that this is called building in public. I was just doing that for fun and I was posting a lot on Twitter. So, my first break happened when somebody from the Microsoft team reached out and said to me in 2020 that, hey, we are doing Microsoft Build online for the first time. Would you like to be there and present as a student panelist? And I was speaking there about Power Platform. So that was the first time I was actually speaking in public and not just speaking in front of my mirror. So that was the first break that happened. And then I started speaking and attending more events. And almost a year later, I got my first technical internship. It was at a startup based out of US. And there I was building applications with Power Platform and with Azure. Then in 2021 is when I saw that there is an internship opportunity at Microsoft and I applied. The competition was, it was fierce. And like it would have been, because everybody wants to work in a company like Microsoft. But I was super excited that I got an offer, an internship plus a full-time offer to work at Microsoft. So I was there for almost a year. I was helping customers with Exchange and Outlook services. And yeah, I was focused on Exchange and Outlook while I was at Microsoft. But at the side, I was also helping our advocacy team back then to write some articles and build some Power Platform solutions back then. So Power Platform had been my niche back then for almost 2 to 3 years. Then I switched into this developer advocacy job role and I was doing everything related to tech, be it web development, be it AI, be it even backend development, like front end, back end, everything. And I wanted to get back to the Microsoft system, also the ecosystem, because I loved how the people were and how it was the main reason how I started my technical journey. Now in 2025 is when I applied for the MVP program and got selected starting this January. So yeah, now it all started from being a student ambassador to an employee to an MVP. So this contributing to the Microsoft ecosystem and the community in general. And it's been a great 5 to 6 years for me so far.
Yeah, I really love that story because for me, like I do a lot of stuff with students and I'm often encouraging them to become a student ambassador because you can see there is a career path from student ambassador to MVP to then whatever you want to do in the Microsoft ecosystem because An MVP is really a high value employee to any organization. So you're living the story that I'm telling to my students.
Absolutely.
What a
Like
great
anybody,
example.
yeah, if anybody here who is listening to us today and is a student, this is something that no matter what, not just in Microsoft events but in every events, I do suggest students that this is a program that you should join, because this is what it contributes to your growth. Like we used to get certification vouchers, and there were so many other perks that were involved, that made sure that we are learning, there's education involved, and then shaping us as good professionals for the future. So anybody who is listening to us today and is a student, this is a high recommendation from somebody who has been in your place.
Yeah, it's enabling you to be a leader in your community while you're a student and recognizing you for that fact, which I think a lot of people might put a lot of work in while they're a student, but not really get anything out of that that they can bring forward into their career. Whereas the recognition that you got out of being a student ambassador, the global recognition out of getting to speak at Microsoft Build, that's really a tremendous thing. And I was thinking at the same time, in the same build, I had a couple of students, one student, one early in career, talking in that same build that year, because yes, we were all online in 2020. Cool. You spoke about a few things that you were doing there, writing articles and building stuff. I think not everyone realizes how important the open source community can be and what a powerful impact it can have on people's careers. What would you say has been your experience and would be your advice around open source?
Oh yeah, I love this because open source is something that is very close to my heart. And after Microsoft, the company that I joined was open source. So I was doing open source stuff full time for 2 whole years. And now that I am working at DigitalOcean. So I know we'll talk about it in the later half of the of our session, but yeah, like open source has been something that always stayed through me while I was a student, while I was working, and I think it will continue to be so. And it all started with just pushing my code to repositories to use that for storage. And then I got to hear about Hacktoberfest, and I did that for t-shirts. I was like, oh cool, you just contribute to a repository and get a t-shirt for that. That's really cool. So and back then I was a student, I think it was in 2017. So I was like, let's do that. I started doing that. Like I joined for the t-shirt, but I stayed there for the community, and I stayed there for the people, for the tech, and everything. Then after a few years, I got an opportunity to be an intern at, and there's this thing called LFX. So there's this LFX mentorship that happens where you can contribute to open source projects, and there will be mentors who will be helping you solve those issues. And it is a paid internship. So again, if there are any students who are listening to us right now, this is a good opportunity that you can check out if you are interested in open source. And then I did open source full time. I also led a few programs like the open source fund. And what we did through that is, if you are a maintainer, if you have a project, we will be supporting your project with some funds, so you can use it for infrastructure cost, you can use it for any other kind of costs related to your project. And yeah, now I am here at DigitalOcean. So I am building a lot of stuff that we are making it open source, and then we have Hacktoberfest coming up. Plus on the side, I also contribute to a lot of open source projects. Like last year I contributed to some docs on GitHub. I contributed to Microsoft's repository related to machine learning. So yeah, I continue doing that over this on the side, because I really enjoy. And when I see that a peer is merged and I can see that developers are actually using it, like it has some impact, that is what gives me more joy right now. So I can go on and on when it comes to open source, but I hope you understand the feelings by just looking at my face when I talk about open source and communities and tech.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, if they're not involved in open source, they don't really think about what it means. But out there in the world, there's a lot of software written by commercial software providers like Microsoft, which we sell, but there is also a lot of open source stuff that everyone uses. For example, a lot of the major programming languages like Python or like Linux are open source communities that anyone can contribute to. And if your contribution is good, then it will be merged, it will be part of it. And so you get to be part of the building community that is making something really significant. And in Microsoft, although we are a commercial company, our CEO Satya encourages us to contribute to open source to the extent that Microsoft employees are the largest contributor to the open source community in the world. And so this is the same as Microsoft giving money to the community, although they do also give money to fund the community through the sponsorships. But allowing the employees to dedicate some of their time to working on open source is a really good thing, I think, for us as individuals and as a company. But yes, from a student perspective, it's a way you can show off your work and make a real contribution to something that means something, without having to find someone to pay you to do it. And yes, you are doing it for free, but there's real recognition in the open source community. There is a real acknowledgement that you are working on something that means something.
Yeah, I know a lot of students who has contributed something really impactful, and that is what helped them get opportunities for the future. Like, it acted as a proof of work, because if they shared the PR link and it could show the code that they did, it would show how they communicated async through comments and everything, and how they worked on the changes that were required by the maintainers. So it not just tests your technical skills, but it also tests how you are communicating when you don't know the person who is there behind the computer, like how your communication is and how you're able to work and collaborate with multiple people. So there are multiple skills that are being tested, which we might not be thinking while we are making that one commit or while we are raising a PR. But there is so many things that gets polished and improved by just making one small contribution to open source.
Well, now we're really on the right topic, because when people are new, then for sure making that first contribution is really intimidating.
Yeah.
DigitalOcean organises the Hacktoberfest event every year. Now, we are quite a way off October at this point, so people have a chance to put it in their calendar, look it up, find out what it is and all of that. But why don't you tell us what Hacktoberfest is?
Oh yeah, I would love to do that, because if you have heard me speaking just a little while back, I was mentioning that how I started contributing to open source because of Hacktoberfest. So this is an initiative by DigitalOcean, and why we do that is just so letting people know about open source, like we are doing right now. Like, we're talking about open source, so there might be people who haven't heard about open source or doesn't know the goodness of it, but gets to know through our conversation. So similar thing is what DigitalOcean thought of. And then a few years back, if I recall it correctly, it's probably going to the 13th or the 14th year of Hacktoberfest being organized. And it all started with one aim or one vision in mind, that we are here to educate people about open source, to celebrate open source, to let people know that open source software out there is helping, or powering multiple developers, or helping us get tools that are absolutely useful. And it's free of cost, plus just to make sure that we are empowering the community. So we started that, and it runs throughout the month of October. So starting from 1st of October to the end of October, you can contribute to open source projects. So if you go to GitHub and if you look for tags, any project that has the tag Hacktoberfest is something that is valid. And all throughout the month, you need to raise four you can raise multiple pull requests, but then you need to get four pull requests merged. And if that is done, like, previously it was like if you're in the first 500 people who has merged 4 pull requests or has got 4 pull requests merged, then you get a t-shirt, or you get a plant that is planted under your name, or you get e-badges from holopin. So there are multiple rewards that we have been bringing up and changing and improvising over the years. But the crux is that you go out there, you go to GitHub, you find out projects, and you help these maintainers who very well could be the only maintainer throughout the year building their projects, but now you are there helping them build the product and grow it. And this could also be a product that you like. For example, when it comes to recording videos, I really loved OBS and it was open source. So if I could find an issue that I could solve, or something that is very interesting enough for me, and plus something that I can really solve, I would go ahead and raise a pull request. So the entire thing is that throughout the month of October, you appreciate open source, you learn about open source, you go and contribute to open source. So that is what Hacktoberfest is all about. And we are like just in the first quarter, or almost towards the second quarter of 2025. But what we have recently started is called Preptember, from the month of September. So anybody who is hearing about open source for the first time, or is not used to Git and GitHub, then this is your time to learn about those things so that you can prepare for October and then start contributing from October. So that's everything about Preptember and Hacktober, and how you can contribute to open source during that month.
Yeah, and if they search on Hacktoberfest, they will they will find lots of articles from people like Scott Hanselman, from other companies like GitHub and like Microsoft, because everyone is releasing challenges to enable people to contribute something positive. And I should say that in previous years where a DigitalOcean got a lot of complaints, for example, of people just trying to make cosmetic changes. So they would, put a full stop in and then submit that as a pull request just so that they could get their full pull request and get a t-shirt or a tree planted in their name. And then in the next year, DigitalOcean has gone out of their way to ban that and make sure that cosmetic pull requests do not count, and you will not get a reward for that, so that they can stop people wasting the time of those open source maintainers. So it's a continually evolving and growing and improving ecosystem with a focus on helping people contribute to the open source community in a positive way, which I love.
Absolutely. I think like you mentioned, it's really great that you brought up the part of cosmetic changes, because at the end of the day, we want to empower developers like us to contribute to open source, but we also want to help the maintainers who might have been the only person maintaining a huge project for so many years get some contributions and get some help. So if we are doing this cosmetic changes, it's only going to get more work for them, because they're only one person who is going through all of these PRs, and if we are spamming them, it is really hard for those maintainers to skim through those, and basically we are not going to help them. So I having that balance, or making it a win-win situation for the us as developers and for them as maintainers, is what we are striving to reach.
Yeah, that's perfect. Cool. So, now, before we jump into the more technical elements of today's show, I just want to remind our audience that you can ask questions in chat. So, we're going to share the answers here in our On24 platform, so the rest of the audience benefits from them as well. So, please ask away. You can ask them at any time during the chat, and we will get to those. But I'm very excited to see the hands-on demo that you're going to show us. I know we're going to look at some AI stuff and some GitHub Actions. Why don't you tell us what you're going to share today?
Oh, sure. So, like you mentioned, Michelle, that it is a GitHub action, but I would like to give a backstory of why did I build the GitHub action? Why was it needed? So, I write a lot of technical articles, both as a professional plus as a hobby. Like, I love writing. This writing has always been my forte since many years now. And while we are doing it, while I'm doing it on the side or as a hobby, I can write it anyway. I don't need to follow any guides or any guidelines or any, there are so many metrics that comes into place that I don't need to follow code guidelines. I don't need to make sure that it's optimized for SEO or anything as such. But when we are writing it professionally, we want to make it really high quality, and we want to follow certain guidelines, and every company has their own guidelines. So throughout my multiple experience, I saw that maybe writing an article takes me 2 days, but the review is something that takes another 2 days. So my shipping speed is reduced, and it's not because somebody is slow or there is a lot of backlog, but it's purely because it's a manual process, and it takes time for the other person who might have had other priorities to go line by line through my article, through my code, and to the entire gist, to make sure that I am following all the guidelines. So I thought that, and we know that AI is already amazing when it comes to checking grammar, in helping us reframe, in helping us writing code. And that is when I thought that, why don't I use AI to help me go through the review process faster, but it is also trained on my or my company's writing styles. For example, I'm sure Microsoft might have different writing guides while writing articles that gets published in the community tutorials or in the curriculums. So in through this action, you can train AI to learn from the articles or the documentation that you have already written, and you can then tell them that, hey, this is a new article that I have written. Please see that it is following all the writing guides and style guides that we have. Additionally, also check for grammatical errors, also check if the heading and everything is fine, and there are no extra spaces or trailing spaces. What this does is, and as soon as you raise a PR, it will just check the file that you have you have committed, and then it will go line by line through everything which previously a human would have done, and it would have taken them 1 to 2 days. It now just takes a few seconds to a minute to list all the problems that might have been there in our article. And it also comes with suggestions that, in this line, this is how you have written it, but maybe you can use it in this way, because this is how your this is how the sentence looks better, or this is how your company prefers it. So I know it's a huge explanation, it might sound very complicated, but trust me, it is not as complicated when I show you the demo.
Okay, well, and that's the AI part. Of course, the GitHub Actions part is all about automating that flow and just making that so that as soon as you do something, it does it automatically, right? Cool.
So we're talking about the GitHub action that can help you reduce manual review hours. And I named it as article review GitHub action. It's there on Marketplace. So you can also use it for your repositories. Just a heads up, this is only applicable for those teams, which I am guessing is a huge percentage of teams that use GitHub based workflows for writing the documentation or for their technical articles. So for anybody who is new and is hearing about GitHub Action for the first time, I will explain it to, like, I'm 5 year old. So let's think of it as a process that runs a lot of checks on the background for you, and it's all automated. So for example, anybody who is writing code, there are checkers that checks if the indentation of the code is in order, or if if there are no lint errors, or if it is make sure that it is structured properly. So what GitHub Actions in general does for you is, it's an automated process that runs, and there should be a trigger for that. In this case, we'll see how pull request is a trigger for it, but in other cases it could be something like whenever there is a whenever there is a commit that is made, or whenever there is some files that are changed. So it depends on how the trigger is. But then whenever you're writing code, and when we do that in a YML file like here, So GitHub, we are just explaining it in simple language that, hey, you are a GitHub action. Your name is whatever. For my example, it's a Markdown, since we are checking Markdown files, and it's a Markdown grammar checker, or it could be article checker. Like, just write the name for yourself. And the trigger is that whenever there is a pull request, and when there are files that are newly added or changed, or if you close a pull request and you reopen it, that is when it should be triggered. And it should check for markdown files within your pull requests. So this is what I did for my GitHub action. But depending on how you are building your GitHub action, you can give it a name, you can give it a trigger. A trigger is basically something that make tells the GitHub action that it is time for you to run now. And in my case, this is pull request. Like, whenever I'm raising a pull request and it has a markdown file, that is when my GitHub action runs. And typically, in the kind of GitHub action that you are building, once this trigger is done, it will do as you have asked it to. And in my case, it should check for grammatical errors. It will make sure that the style guide and everything is in accordance with how your company or how my company guidelines are. Or it could be, if you're writing for yourself, you must have had some writing guidelines for yourself. So just making sure that whatever article you're writing or whatever documentation you're writing, it's following your style and your guide. And in the next parts, what we are doing is, I'll just explain this one because this part is important. Just a heads up, this is open source, so you can always go to my file and check out how the code is done. And we also have a Copilot right now, so at any point of time, if you are stuck anywhere and if you feel you don't understand what this line of code does, you can just ask Copilot to explain it to you, and it will do it right from the browser or from VS Code or whatever IDE you are using. Now back to what I was explaining. So to run the or to make sure that my GitHub action knows how my writing style is or what to check, we are using an AI system. And for that, I will be using DigitalOcean's Gen AI platform. But you can use any other platform, and like, to build this one. And what we are doing is, we are using DigitalOcean's Gen AI platform, and then I'm making a call to our OpenAI SDK to tell that, hey, this is my PR has been raised. There is a markdown file. Now, please check the file and list all the errors that I have been, or that could have been there on my article. So here, what it does is, it just installs this Axios library. So whenever I'm calling the API, it knows that the API is to be started, and it should be checking my markdown file. And now here, and since we are using DigitalOcean's Gen AI platform, these are two things that we need to keep in place. One is our API token, and the other one is a agent based URL. I'll show you how to get it from DigitalOcean and how you can also add it to your repository. And once that, and if there is no markdown file, it will just say there is no markdown file. It could have been that you just raised a PR with a JavaScript file, so it will not run the action for that, or it will run the action for that and it will say that there is no markdown file, so we will skip the grammar check. And then finally, what we are doing is, we are running a grammarchecker.js file. This file has all the code, or let's say all the logic, that is going into making the GitHub action understand that, how do I make calls to my DigitalOcean Gen AI platform, and how does it know what file to take and what are the things that it needs to check. So I'll go to this grammar checker file, and here we go. So first, what we do is, we add some API keys. And since we are using OpenAI SDK, so anybody who has played around a little bit with OpenAI, you probably know that, this is, the chat completions API, or the SDK that we will be using. And since we are using DigitalOcean, so we need to, like, we are calling OpenAI SDK from DigitalOcean, so I need to pass the agent URL here, and I also need to populate the agent base URL from DigitalOcean and the token API here. So this is important. And once that is done, it goes through a bit of, in these lines of code, basically what it is doing is, whenever you are pushing a markdown file, it is extracting the text that you have written. Right now it is not checking for code, like if you can read to the comments here, like it's removing the code blocks, it is removing any HTML tags, and it is removing links and images as well. And it is just extracting the text, and it is sending this text to my DigitalOcean AI agent. And it is telling my AI agent that you are a skilled editor, and you should check for grammatical errors, typos, incorrect sentence formation, and everything else that is needed to make sure that the article is really nice and simple. And then we are using and for this we are using a cloud model, but you can also use any of OpenAI's model. I just used this one for demo purpose, but we are using OpenAI SDK. And then what we are expecting out of this model is to return us all the issues that were there in my markdown files. And like here, it if there were no issues, it will say that there were no issues found and your check has run correctly. But if there are issues, it will just tell that okay, there are issues that were found in your file, and this is how you can change it, or these are some suggestions from us. Before I go into the technicalities, let us see this in action. So I already have a repository, and this is the one, it's called test article, just to check that my GitHub action is working correctly. And for you to test it on your repository, so if you are an end user and you want to use my GitHub action, you will have to set up a similar repository. And the first and the most important thing is you should have this folder called .github/workflows, and there you need to add a YML file. And this YML file is basically telling that okay, you need to use Haimantika's GitHub action called article review GitHub action, that is currently on version 1.1.1. And you need to also add your DigitalOcean agent API tokens and base URL, and then it will run the action for you. This YML file is there on my README, so you don't need to write it from scratch. You just need to do some copy and paste, and you are ready to go. And the next step is you need to go to settings, and from here under security, you need to click on actions. And here you will need to add two repository secrets, which is our agent base URL and then our API token. And that's it for the setup. So let's try and see this action in action. What I'll do for, I have tested it multiple times, as you can already see. So I have a pull request here, and for the sake of this demo, this is a markdown file, by the way. I'll just copy this markdown file and I'll run the action right in front of you right now to show you how it works. So I'll create a new file. If you're a terminal person, do it from your terminal or from your IDE, but I'll just use it here, and I'll maybe call it as test article.md. Markdown files has a md extension, and then I'll commit change. And if you remember, the action is triggered when a pull request is raised. So I'll create a pull request, and then I'll wait for the action to be triggered. So if you see that there's a Git Guardian that I have automatically running for all my repositories, and here my markdown grammar checker action is now working. And you can go to the actions tab and you'll see how it is proceeding. You'll see that it is saying that okay, we have, like I mentioned, that you need to use the DigitalOcean agent URL and also the token. So it is saying that okay, I have scanned your repository. I have found that, oops, sorry, I have found that you have set up these tokens. And I also see that there is a pull request that is raised, and it has your test article.md file. So I will start the grammar analysis, and this is where it is sending the text file that we were extracting in our JavaScript code just that I showed you just a while back, and it is sending to my DigitalOcean AI Edge agent. And when the analysis is complete, it will give you some of the issues that it found. For example, there is a grammar issue that it found, and it says that, and the explanation is that the article the is unnecessary, you don't need to use that, you should just use in recent years. So as you can see, like, this has been trained on the kind of language that we use at DigitalOcean. You can also use it, you can also train the agent according to your style guides and according to your writing guides. So this is how the the GitHub action works, and based on the suggestions that and the explanations that it provided, you can go back to the file, you can make those changes, and you can write a very fine and finished article. And as you can see, it hardly took a few seconds to a minute to review the entire article and give you suggestions, which ideally, if it was manual, it would probably take a while. So this is a big moment for me, because now, if when this action is used in my repository, I don't need to wait for 2 or 3 days to get it reviewed and published. I can just write my article, the action will check everything for me, and then my shipping speed is increased. I can move on to the next article. So I think this is really useful, and anybody who is a technical writer or a documentation engineer or even a developer like me, I really feel that this action will help you. So I'll take a pause before I show the AI agent and how we are building it using DigitalOcean. Is there anything else that you want me to cover, Michelle? Any questions that you might have while I was demoing?
Well, I was just thinking what kind of GitHub Actions I use myself. I use probably what is the most common one, that it will automatically deploy a website to GitHub Pages and deploy it to Azure. Those are the two GitHub Actions that I have for my website and for the apps that I build. As soon as I commit those and do the pull request, it will then automatically go through and start deploying those to Pages and to Azure, which I think is a huge time saver, because a lot of people might forget that part when they've spent all their time working on the code. And so yeah, I love GitHub Actions for that. The other thing I thought of while you were going through your stuff is, when you did your pull request, you did what many lazy developers do, and that was just commit your pull request empty.
Oh,
Whereas
oops,
you
yes.
could absolutely be clicking on the GitHub Copilot icon in the pull request and click on summary, and then it will actually write for you all of the changes that you have made in order to yes, like that, in order to fill that in for you, which is essential, especially when you're doing Hacktoberfest. If you try to submit a blank pull request, no one is going to be accepting that to merge.
Oh, that's a very, very good point that you just brought up, because this is important. I usually don't do that, but just for the sake of the demo, I did it. But now that you mentioned, and while you're talking about GitHub Copilot, I quickly, clicked on edit. So this shows that it's never too late. You might have missed the commit message while you are in a hurry of raising the PRs, but you can always go back to edit, click on GitHub Copilot, and let it summarize the PR for you. So yeah, you're never too late to fix the things that you have not done while raising the PR. Cool, thanks for that, Michelle. Really appreciate it. So this is like mydigitalocean.com. Just go to cloud.digitalocean.com, sign in. If you're signing up for the first time, you'll have a $200 credit, so you can use that to build applications with it. And then what we do is, like, I'll not build the agent from scratch, but just click on create agent, give it a name, give it some instructions. If you want to know exactly how I do it, I wrote a very big and explanatory article on how it works and how you should do it. So this should be your, like, the holy book to know how to build agents and how to build something that I just showed.
And we will put that you should see that in the resources below, as well as some Microsoft Learn instructions on using GitHub Actions. We have all of that in the resources widget on the screen.
Yeah, cool. So just like you can give the agent instructions that since this is a grammar checker or maybe an article reviewer, you have sorry an agent, so you can just tell it that you are an agent and your task is to look for let's say for grammatical issues, for h tags and whatever guide issues that you have. And then you have a lot of models to choose from, so you can use any model from here. And this is where the interesting part comes, that you can choose a knowledge base. So for my case, my knowledge base was my entire tutorial repository, and you can just create a knowledge base and then you can click on create agent and it will create the agent for you. I'll go back to the agent that I have created. Oops, yes, here it is. And once the agent is created and deployed, you'll have a playground where you can actually, maybe paste. Let me see if I still have it. So I'll just paste the article that I wrote, and then, oops, I think this is too much or something, or it's working. But in the end, what okay, yeah, you can send the agent the a test message and see how it is working. If it is working at expected, then you can just use it. But if it is not working as expected, you can probably change the prompt. You can go to settings and you can change the temperature, the token size, or whatever changes are needed to make sure that it is working perfectly. Now if you remember, I talked about the API token and also about the base URL, that the two things that we need to get this GitHub action working. The base URL is this, so just click on this, copy paste, and for the API or the endpoint access key, you need to create a key from here, keep it copy, keep it copied and paste it on your GitHub Actions under the settings tab, and your GitHub action is ready to go. And before I stop the demo, there is one last thing that I would like to show, which is really cool. I know I talked about how this GitHub action can be trained on your tutorials. So for that, you just need to go to knowledge base, click on create a knowledge base and give it a name. And here you can select a data source. What I did for this demo is I clicked on URL for web crawling, and I just gave it this entire, not just this one, but we have a ton of tutorials here. So I just clicked and pasted this URL, and I said that you need to check everything like this. You need to crawl or you need to scrape all the data that I have on my tutorial site. And then I'll just click on add selected data source. And then I'll, if you remember, while I was creating the agent, there was an option to select the knowledge base, right? So you can just select the knowledge base and you can tell it that, okay, my knowledge base is the entire tutorial site that I have scraped. So use that as context, learn from the guides that I have written, and then give me suggestions based on it. So just going back to our action, you'll see that it is giving me some suggestions on how I should improve it. So these suggestions are coming from the style guide and from the tone guidelines that we have at DigitalOcean. You can do it for your company or for your personal use. So this is how I built the GitHub action. And like Michelle mentioned, you'll have the resources listed under, so you can always follow the tutorial and build one for yourself. So this is where the tutorial ends, and I would like to talk more about how I want to expand it in the future, but I'll stop sharing my screen. I'll take a pause and I'll go back to you, Michelle, if you have anything else to cover.
I just thought when you were talking about, choosing your data sources, it's one of the key things that people need to bear in mind when they are working with AI. People often wonder, how do they stop their AI hallucinating? How do they stop it being irrelevant and sharing stuff that isn't contextual to their own organization or company. And as you showed, selecting your organization's data sources is part of that. The prompt engineering that you do when you set up your AI is also a key part of that, telling it may not go to the internet, it may not make stuff up. If it doesn't know, it should say so. A lot of stuff that you can find within the responsible AI guidelines on the Microsoft site. And also using stuff like Azure safety and content filters, those things as well can stop with those hallucinations. But the very, the start of it is indeed making sure that you are giving it the right information to access and telling it to only take that information from there. That's really, really cool.
Yeah, cool. So, like I mentioned, that I do have plans on extending this project. This started as a weekend project, but when I posted it online, there's a lot of people, they're like, oh, this is really cool, what can we do next with it? So my next plan on another weekend is that I'll be using GitHub models to extend this GitHub action. Right now, if you remember, while I was showing the code, I was telling that it is only extracting the text, but it is not extracting the code. And while we are writing technical guides or even documentation, we write a lot of code examples. And a lot of organizations have certain guidelines on how your code should be. Maybe it should be that every function should be followed by a comment on what it does, or there are a few, the variable names should be, XYZ, or it should be something that is easy to understand. So every organization had certain guidelines on writing code or some best practices to follow. So as an extension of this GitHub action, what I plan to do is, I know there's multiple amazing models that GitHub models already have, so I'll be using those, and I will be training on the code samples that I have written. That anybody, like if you have some examples, you can also use that for training. And then along with the text, it will also check the code and make sure that it is following the best practices and the guidelines. So that's the next step of the GitHub action, or an extension of the GitHub action, that I will be building. And I plan to use some of the newer models that GitHub models is supporting right now.
Yeah, that's cool. Another thing to bear in mind is you can also customize your Copilot instructions at your repo level and a personal level. And so that's some of those things are things that I have put in there. So I've put for all code, keep it as simple as possible. I've put verbosely comment any functions because I really like comments. I've put don't use Babel because I don't want it to use Babel. I want it to use other things. That's probably just a little bit specific to something I was working on, but generally you can say don't use this instead. Use the current version, not the latest version, or things like that. In your instructions, but they are limited in the amount, which is why it's a good idea to do it as you are doing it in GitHub Action, because you have a lot more room rather than being limited as to what you can do in there.
Exactly.
Thank you, Haimantika, for that really cool demo. Clearly, GitHub Actions is a powerful way to automate development tasks. I definitely need to learn how to do more of those myself, and I can't wait to try your tutorial after this. We will link all the resources, including that tutorial from this episode, to our GitHub log, and you'll find them as well in the widget at the bottom of the screen. We'll be answering all your questions online, and we will stay online to answer them for another 10 or 15 minutes. Thank you for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you again next month. Thanks, Haimantika.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michelle, and for everybody who joined us. I hope this was helpful. You can either use it as it is, or you can also, this can be the starting point for you to build a GitHub action for yourself. So yeah, I really hope this you learned something out of it, and you will be building some cool actions in the future.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye.